and a warm welcome to many of my viewers on The Mark Dolan Show on YouTube. We've been looking forward to this interview. I'm delighted to welcome in a Talk Breakfast and Mark Dolan Show exclusive, Tom Bower, who is the author of Betrayal, Power, Deceit and the Fight for the Future of the Royal Family, a book that's already a bestseller. It's released on Thursday. You can pre-order now, and I would urge you to do so. Tom Bower, welcome to Talk Breakfast.
Good morning. Thanks very much.
We'll start with a simple one, a nice easy one as a warm-up. Is Prince Harry happy with his new life in California?
Ish. I'd say half and half. He'd love to be able to be both in California and have great status in Britain. And the lack of any status in Britain and diminishing status in California means that I think on the whole, he's pretty frustrated.
We're going to come to the rather perilous state of their respective careers in the public eye. Can I ask for your appraisal of the health of their marriage?
Well, in my view, the marriage is okay. I mean, I think that Harry always needed and loved Meghan. It was a marriage made in heaven for him. She obviously went into the marriage with other things in mind, namely fame and fortune and a glittering career in California. But I think on the whole, they have a good relationship. I don't think there's any evidence that they don't.
What about the suggestion that Meghan is a controlling, narcissistic personality? Of course, your brilliant previous book, which was Revenge, suggested that it was actually Meghan Markle that was the driving force behind Harry's departure from the royal family.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think what I show in this book is, in that episode, that she actually sort of fueled his grievances. What happened until he met Meghan, he was quite happy in Britain. He sometimes obviously frustrated about not being able to land a stable relationship with a woman. But in terms of his status, he was much loved, very popular, and was doing very well. But when she got here and saw what fate awaited her in terms of being number two to Kate and not living in the luxury she wanted and having to obey the royal commands, she stoked constantly that he should feel aggrieved and should feel unhappy. And I think that is in the end why he agreed. And he himself wanted to leave Britain because she told him it was impossible for them to live happily in Britain. And for that, I blame her entirely.
In your best-selling biographies of other public figures, including Tony Blair and King Charles, you've been very unforgiving in your portrayal of these complex personalities. Can you describe the Meghan Markle that you know to my viewers and listeners?
Well, I think the Meghan Markle I know is on the good side, intelligent, resourceful, definitely resilient under fire. But on the other hand, intensely selfish, only self-opinionated, unable to see anything other than through her own lens, as she would say, appalling treatment of her father and her friends, old friends, a very conflicted personality. But worst of all for her is that she couldn't find huge fame and fortune on her own accomplishments. Her problem is she has very limited talent. She isn't a great actress, to say the least. She doesn't actually come across as someone of great warmth when she's not acting. There's no mystery about her. She is just a hugely ambitious, grasping person. And I think that is, in the end, what brings her down, that there is nothing original about her. She's tried her hardest through Netflix and all the various podcasts to be able to borrow a very indicative individual furrow and prove herself unique, and has consistently failed to do that. And the reason why, if I may just say why it's so fascinating, is because, of course, they are global characters, they're global celebrities, they've caused enormous damage to the royal family, and we're all fascinated how this is going to end. And that's the nature of my book. She's now paying the price of betrayal.
Here's a fun little experiment you can try yourself. Go type Highgrove 47-minute into YouTube's search bar right now and just watch what happens. You'll get a wall of thumbnails, all screaming some version of the exact same headline: disaster, panic, humiliation, ends in chaos, stacked one after another like a fan fiction contest nobody agreed to enter. 47 minutes. Not 45, not 50. 47 specifically, apparently down to the second, as reported by absolutely no one who was actually in the room. It's honestly a little impressive how confidently the internet can clock a private family visit to the minute, while somehow also insisting nobody knows what was actually said inside it. So naturally we had to sit down and actually sort through this one, because there's a real story buried somewhere underneath all that noise, and it deserves better than getting flattened into a disaster thumbnail by channels that clearly weren't standing in that garden at Highgrove House. Welcome to Sussex Strong, the place where we take these viral royal moments, separate what's actually confirmed from what's been dramatically embellished for clicks, and let you walk away with the real picture instead of the panicked version. If that sounds like your kind of channel, go ahead and hit subscribe before we get into it, because tonight's breakdown has more layers than most of the videos currently flooding your recommended feed. Let's start with what we actually genuinely know, because it's honestly a pretty good story on its own, once you strip away the manufactured drama. Buckingham Palace confirmed that King Charles and Queen Camilla hosted Harry, Meghan and their 2 children, Archie and Lilibet, at Highgrove House, Charles's private estate out in Gloucestershire. This was, notably, the first time King Charles had seen his grandchildren in more than 4 years. Let that sit for a second, because it's easy to lose in the noise. 4 years. Harry and Meghan hadn't even been in the UK together since 2022, when they came back for Queen Elizabeth's funeral. So, whatever else this visit was or wasn't, it was, at minimum, a grandfather meeting grandchildren he hadn't laid eyes on in over 4 years, which is not exactly the setup for a story that needs extra manufactured drama bolted onto it to matter. The family reportedly flew in from an unspecified European location, and the visit itself was described by the palace as private, with no photographs released. Reports at the time also suggested the Sussex family was staying at Althorp House, Princess Diana's childhood home and the site of her grave, which sits conveniently within reach of both London and Birmingham, where Harry had a week of Invictus-related engagements lined up. That detail matters, by the way, because it places this Highgrove visit inside a much bigger trip, not as some isolated single dramatic event floating on its own. Harry had arrived in the UK the week before for a string of charity engagements tied to the countdown toward the Invictus Games in Birmingham, and there had been plenty of media speculation beforehand about whether Meghan and the kids might join him at some point during that stretch. And that's actually where a real confirmed complication does enter the story, just not the one most of these videos are focused on. There had been earlier reports that Meghan was scheduled to join Harry at a public Invictus Games countdown event, and that those plans shifted, reportedly tied to the long-running dispute over Harry's UK security arrangements. That's a genuine, well-documented, ongoing issue, not tabloid invention. Harry has been extremely public about how unresolved questions around his security in the UK have shaped decisions about when and how his family travels there, and it's entirely plausible that logistics tied to that dispute affected which events Meghan ultimately did or didn't attend during this particular trip. That's a real boring bureaucratic explanation for a schedule shift, And it's a lot less exciting than disaster, which might be exactly why it doesn't show up in nearly as many thumbnails. So against that actual backdrop, a real reunion, a real 4-year gap since Charles last saw his grandchildren, a real ongoing security dispute shaping the logistics of the trip, you'd think the coverage would centre on, that. Instead, what actually exploded across a huge chunk of YouTube was this oddly specific narrative about a 47-minute meeting that supposedly ended in disaster, frequently attributed to commentary from Tom Bower, describing what's alternately been framed as a carefully managed meeting that produced no public breakthrough, or, depending which version of the thumbnail you land on, something considerably more catastrophic. Panic, humiliation, Meghan supposedly fleeing the country immediately afterward. Here's the thing worth sitting with for a second. The meeting was explicitly described by the palace as private, with no photographs released, which means, functionally, nobody outside that immediate family and their closest staff has any verified, on-the-record account of what was actually said, how long any particular portion of the visit lasted, or what the emotional tenor of the conversation actually was. So when a wave of videos confidently assigns an exact 47-minute runtime to a meeting nobody outside the family was present for, and then builds an entire narrative of collapse and humiliation on top of that suspiciously precise, suspiciously unverifiable number, that's worth treating with a lot more skepticism than the thumbnails are asking you to bring. And look, we've talked before on this channel about how this specific genre of content tends to work, and this is a pretty textbook example of it playing out in real time. A real event happens, in this case a genuinely moving family reunion after years apart, and within days it gets run through an entire ecosystem of channels that specialize in taking a real mundane human moment and repackaging it with maximum dramatic framing, because grandfather finally meets his grandchildren doesn't generate anywhere near the clicks that Meghan Panics does. The specificity of the 47 minutes detail is actually part of what makes it convincing sounding to a casual viewer. It feels like the kind of thing that could only come from someone with real inside information. But specificity isn't the same thing as sourcing, and a suspiciously exact number repeated across dozens of unrelated channels, all citing each other rather than any named verifiable source, is much more consistent with a rumour that's been polished into believability than with an actual confirmed timeline. Now, we should be fair here, because not every claim floating around this story is baseless speculation. The underlying tension around Harry's security situation is real and well documented. The broader context of a still complicated, still evolving relationship between Harry and the rest of the royal family is real too. Nobody's pretending everything between these people is perfectly smooth, and treating this as some kind of instantly resolved fairy tale reunion would be just as dishonest as the doom and gloom version. Reconciliation processes, when they're genuine, tend to be messy, incremental, and full of exactly the kind of logistical friction we saw here. A shifted schedule, an unresolved security dispute, a visit kept deliberately private rather than turned into a big public photo opportunity. That's actually a pretty normal human way for a fractured family relationship to slowly rebuild, if it's rebuilding at all. Quietly, privately, without cameras, without a big public statement, just grandparents spending real time with grandchildren they've missed. Which is honestly what makes the whole disaster framing feel so unnecessary once you sit with it. If the actual confirmed facts are a family that hasn't fully reconciled had a private visit without media access after years of estrangement, complicated by an ongoing security dispute that's been publicly discussed for ages. That's a genuinely reasonable, sympathetic, complicated situation. It doesn't need an invented catastrophic ending bolted onto it to be interesting. The story is already interesting. It's a real family working through real estrangement, with real stakes, and a grandfather getting real time with grandchildren he hadn't seen in years. Turning that into panic and humiliating and disaster isn't adding accuracy to the story. It's actively working against it, replacing something genuinely human and complicated with a cartoon version built purely for engagement. It's also worth pointing out how often Tom Bower's name specifically gets attached to this style of framing, because if you've watched our other videos, you already know exactly how much independent weight we think his commentary deserves on its own. He's built a career on unauthorized, frequently disputed biographies of high-profile figures, and again representatives for the people he covers, including the Sussexes, have pushed back hard against his characterizations. That doesn't automatically make every word he's ever said about this meeting false. But it does mean that when his commentary becomes the anchor for an entire wave of disaster videos describing a meeting nobody outside the family actually witnessed, a healthy amount of skepticism isn't optional, it's basically required. So here's where we actually land on this one, being straightforward about it. What's confirmed? A real, meaningful family reunion took place at Highgrove. The first time Charles had seen Archie and Lilibet in over 4 years, kept private and away from cameras. What's also confirmed? There's a real ongoing security dispute that appears to have shaped at least some of the logistics around this broader UK trip, including Meghan's attendance at a separate public Invictus event. What's not confirmed? Basically everything about the internal tone, content, or supposed 47-minute runtime of the actual meeting itself, along with the dramatic disaster and humiliation framing being layered on top of it by an ecosystem of channels that, by definition, weren't there and have no named source actually confirming those details. And honestly, we think that gap between the real, quietly hopeful story and the manufactured catastrophic one tells you something important about how a lot of royal content gets made these days. It's not that nobody cares about accuracy. It's that accuracy doesn't reliably outperform drama in the algorithm. And so the version of this story that spread the fastest wasn't the true one. It was the one engineered to spread the fastest. That's worth remembering literally every single time one of these hyper-specific, suspiciously dramatic royal headlines crosses your feed, whether it's about this family or anyone else. We'd also gently point out that this particular story, a private family reunion after years of estrangement, is actually a genuinely warm and human moment worth appreciating on its own terms, whatever else is going on around it. A grandfather getting to spend time with grandchildren he hasn't seen since they were small isn't a footnote to some bigger disaster narrative. For a family that spent years being scrutinized, picked apart, and turned into content by people who've never met them, a quiet, private, camera-free visit might honestly be exactly what reconciliation is supposed to look like. Not a staged photo opportunity built for headlines, but just family time, kept private on purpose. So, what do you make of all this? Do you think there's real substance behind the disaster framing, or does this look like another case of a genuinely sweet, complicated family moment getting completely overrun by manufactured drama built for clicks? Let us know your honest takedown in the comments. We always read through them, And some of you have a genuinely sharp eye for spotting when a story's been dressed up past what the actual sourcing supports. Before we wrap up, if you appreciated us actually slowing this one down instead of running with the scariest possible headline, do us a solid and subscribe to Sussex Strong if you haven't already, and turn on notifications so you catch it the moment we've got an actual update worth covering. We're going to keep doing exactly this, taking these viral claims apart, checking what's actually confirmed, and giving you the version of the story that's grounded in something real, instead of a suspiciously precise number nobody can actually source. If you're already part of the crew, drop a like, share this with someone who's been sent one too many Meghan Panics videos this week, and let us know in the comments what other viral royal claim you want us to dig into next. And here's the thought we want to leave you with tonight. Sometimes the real story is quieter, messier, and considerably less dramatic than the thumbnail wants you to believe. And honestly, that's usually exactly the sign that it's the true one. A grandfather meeting grandchildren he hasn't seen in 4 years doesn't need a fake disaster bolted onto the end of it to matter. It already does. Stay grounded, stay skeptical of suspiciously specific numbers with no named source behind them, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks so much for watching Sussex Strong.